Emily was only 17. She had no mother to shield her, no family to stand in the way, no one to protect her from the cruelty of the man who dared to call himself her stepfather. The ranch that once felt like her whole world had become nothing but a prison. The ropes dug in her wrists, rough fibers biting so deep her skin burned with every slight movement. Her legs were stretched painfully against the old wooden fence, leaving her helpless under the scorching sun. Every breath felt like it cost her strength she didn't have left. Fear weighed heavier than the ropes, pressing down on her chest until it felt like she could barely breathe. She was too young to understand how life had twisted into this nightmare. Too young to fight against a man like Frank, who carried years of bitterness and power on his side. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. He struck her when she refused to hand him the ranch papers. He cursed when she cried. He told her she was worthless, a burden, a nothing. Without him, he said, she wouldn't survive a day. Each word cut deeper than a rope. Every slap left more than a bruise. It left a scar inside her spirit. Piece by piece, Emily felt her childhood slipping away, buried under silence and terror. She had taught herself to hide her tears, to bite her lip until it bled, to bury her screams so deep no one could hear. But on this day it was too much. The cries tore out of her chest before she could stop them, raw and broken, carried into the air like a plea she no longer believed anyone would answer. Her throat was dry, her voice cracked, but she called anyway, clinging to the faintest shred of hope. Sweat and blood streaked down her skin. The dry grass whispered death around her. Frank's shadow seemed burned into her memory, a reminder that the torment would never end unless she gave up everything her mother had left her. Emily shut her eyes, forcing herself to remember her mother's smile, the laughter that once filled this same ranch, the warmth that had made it feel like home. But now all that remained was dust, rope, bruises, and the sound of Frank's cruel laughter echoing inside her head. Her body trembled from exhaustion, her spirit hanging on the edge of breaking. The land she loved was slipping from her hands, her future stolen before it had even begun. She was still just a girl, forced into a world of violence and greed by a man who was never truly family. Her cries carried across the empty fields, startling the birds from the fence posts. The wind caught her voice and pulled it further, past the ranch, into the distance. But who would hear it? Who would care enough to come? Her lips quivered, the last ounce of strength bleeding out of her body. She whispered a final plea into the sky, not knowing if anyone at all was listening. Her heart raced, not with hope, but with the terror of being forgotten. And then the sound came, a low, steady rhythm that broke through the heavy silence. Hoofbeats. Jack Carter had been riding across the dry fields, just another day under the wide blue sky, when the faintest cry reached his ears. At first, he thought it was the wind, a trick carried through the grass. But then he heard it again. Not an animal, a human voice, a girl's voice, desperate and breaking. Jack pulled his horse to a stop, brows furrowed, turning toward the sound. Something about that cry carried a weight no man with a conscience could ignore. He nudged the horse forward, slow and cautious, scanning the horizon. The crunch of dry grass under the hooves mixed with the heavy air, thick with heat and dust. As he drew closer, his eyes narrowed. And then he saw her. Emily, tied brutally to the fence, her arms bound, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Her body bore the marks of violence, her eyes the scars of betrayal. For a moment, Jack's chest tightened so hard he thought he might not breathe. He had seen suffering before. Men killed in ambushes, families broken by hunger, friends buried under the cruel hand of fate. But this was different. This was not chance. This was not bad luck. This was evil done by choice. Emily lifted her head at the sound of hooves. Her eyes widened, a fragile spark of hope flickering in their depths. Her lips moved, trembling. She begged without words, only through the broken stare she gave him. Jack slid down from his horse, the red scarf at his neck stirring in the dry wind. He crouched down to meet her gaze. His voice came rough but steady. "You're safe now, girl. I've got you." Her shoulders shook, part relief, part terror of what might follow. Jack pulled the knife from his belt, sunlight flashing off the blade, and began slicing through the ropes. Each strand snapped with a sound sharp as thunder, like chains breaking. Emily winced as blood returned to her hands, but she held back the cry, not wanting to seem weak in front of this stranger who had already done more for her than anyone had in years. When the last rope fell, Jack caught her before she could stumble. She leaned against him, trembling. In that moment, he made a silent promise. No man with honor would walk away now. But the ground itself seemed to hold its breath, for in the distance, a shadow still lingered, the kind of shadow that never disappeared so easily. Emily's knees buckled as the ropes fell away, but Jack held her steady. Her skin was hot from the sun, her wrists raw, her breaths ragged like every inhale scraped against her ribs. She clutched at his shirt, not from trust yet, but because she didn't have the strength to stand alone. Jack's arms stayed firm around her back, grounding her like an oak in a storm. "Easy now," he murmured, his tone low and steady, the way a man calms a spooked horse. "Breathe. You're still here." She wanted to believe that. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "He'll come back." Her voice was so faint it almost broke apart in the air. "He always comes back." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't need to ask who she meant. He had seen the bruises on her face, the rope burns cutting deep into her wrists. No decent man treated blood like that. He brushed a strand of damp hair from her cheek, careful not to startle her. "Not while I'm around," he said. The words came out rough, but there was steel under them, a kind of quiet vow. Emily looked at him through swollen eyes, unsure whether to trust the stranger. For so long, words had been weapons against her. Promises meant nothing. But there was something in his tone, something different from the venom she was used to. She leaned into him as he helped her toward his horse. Every step felt like walking through fire. Her legs trembled, her ankles stiff, but Jack matched her pace, slow and patient. When they reached the tall, chestnut gelding, she froze, fear flashing in her eyes. "I can't," she whispered. "My legs, they won't." Jack crouched down, so his face was level with hers. His eyes were weathered, framed by lines carved from years of sun and loss, but they held no judgment, no demand, only quiet resolve. "Then I'll get you there," he said. Without waiting for her to protest, he lifted her carefully, as if she weighed no more than a child. Emily flinched at first, instinctive, as though every touch might bring pain. But Jack's grip was firm, not cruel. He set her gently onto the saddle, then swung up behind her in one smooth motion. She clutched the saddle horn with trembling hands, holding on not just to leather, but to the thread of safety she thought she had lost forever. The horse moved forward, hooves pounding against dry earth. Dust rose behind them, carrying away the place of her torment. Emily dared a glance back at the fence, at the ropes hanging loose, and for a fleeting moment she felt both relief and dread. Relief that she was no longer tied there, dread that Frank's shadow still stretched across her life. She spoke so softly Jack almost missed it. "It was him, my stepfather. He wants the ranch. He won't stop." Jack's chest burned with anger, but his voice stayed even. "He doesn't own you. He doesn't own this land either. Whatever he thinks, he's wrong. It's yours." The word struck her harder than she expected. No one had ever said that before, not out loud, not with conviction. For a moment, tears welled, not from fear, but from the strange warmth of finally hearing what she had always known deep inside. As the sun dipped lower, they reached the ranch house. Its wooden boards looked tired, worn down by years of neglect and storms, much like the girl herself. Jack dismounted first, then lifted Emily into his arms again before she could argue. She was too weak to resist, too exhausted to care. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. He set her down on a chair, fetched a basin, and poured water. His hands were rough, calloused from years of work, but his touch was deliberate, careful as he cleaned the cuts on her wrists. Emily winced but didn't pull away. She watched him in silence, her mind spinning with questions she was too tired to ask. Why did this stranger care? Why did a man she had never seen before treat her with more kindness in 1 hour than Frank had shown her in all the years he lived under the same roof? Night crept over the ranch, wrapping the house in a restless quiet. Emily sat near the fire, wrapped in a blanket Jack had pulled from a corner. The warmth seeped into her bones, fighting the chill of fear that clung like a second skin. Jack leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his eyes sharp as he listened to the world outside. Every creak, every rustle of the wind carried meaning to him. He knew men like Frank. They didn't walk away after being shamed. They came back. They always came back. Emily's gaze flicked to the door, her chest tight. He won't stop, will he? Jack didn't answer right away. His silence said more than words could. Finally, he looked at her, his expression set like stone. If he comes back, he'll have to go through me first. For the first time in months, Emily allowed herself to close her eyes without ropes cutting into her skin. But sleep did not come easy. Somewhere in the darkness, she could almost hear the crunch of boots on gravel, the low rasp of Frank's voice, and she knew the night ahead would not be a quiet one. The fire had burned low, its glow flickering faintly across the wooden walls. Emily sat wrapped in the blanket, her eyes fixed on the orange embers, though her mind was far from calm. Every pop of the fire made her flinch, every creak of the boards made her heart skip. Jack sat by the door, his arms folded, but his hand never far from the pistol at his side. His hat shadowed his eyes, but his posture was sharp, alert, like a man who had lived through too many ambushes to ever truly rest. Outside, the night stretched wide and heavy. The moon lit the ranch yard in pale silver, and for a time the only sound was the lonely cry of a coyote far off. Emily tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself that she was inside, that the ropes were gone, that Frank wasn't there. But fear was louder than reason. In her mind, his voice still echoed. "You're nothing without me. This ranch belongs to me." Her throat tightened. She pulled the blanket higher, wishing she could hide inside it. But Jack's calm presence by the door was an anchor. He hadn't asked for details, hadn't pressed her to talk, but she knew he had seen enough to understand. And that small piece of understanding gave her just enough courage to whisper, "Why are you helping me?" Jack turned his head, his eyes catching the dim light. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice low and steady, he answered, "Because someone should have helped you a long time ago." The words hit her chest like a stone. Her lips parted, but no reply came. Tears threatened, but she forced them back. She didn't want to cry again, not in front of him. The silence stretched until it was broken by a sound that made her blood freeze. The crunch of boots on gravel. Slow, deliberate. Emily's body went rigid. Her breath caught in her throat. Jack straightened instantly, his hand wrapping around the grip of his pistol. The noise came again, the ranch gate creaking open. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "It's him." Jack held up a hand, steadying her with just that one gesture. "Stay behind me," he said. The footsteps drew closer, heavy, uneven. Then came the voice that had haunted Emily's nights. Harsh, slurred, soaked in rage. "You can't hide her from me, old man. This place is mine, and everything on it belongs to me." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears, but this time something stronger stirred under the fear. She clenched her fists, trembling but defiant. "He's lying," she said, her voice breaking yet louder than before. "Mama left it to me. He'll never take it. Not again." The door rattled under a sudden blow, the wood straining against the force. Jack stood solid, gun raised, his stance steady as if he had done this 100 times. The door burst open, and Frank stormed in. His eyes were bloodshot, his face twisted with fury, his fists clenched tight. Emily shrank back against the wall, her chest pounding, but Jack stepped forward like a wall between them. Frank's voice spat venom. "Get out of my way. She's mine. She's not yours," Jack said, calm but sharp as steel. Frank lunged, swinging a fist wild with anger. Jack ducked and countered with a blow that cracked against Frank's jaw, sending him stumbling. The room erupted into chaos. The table tipped, a lantern swung wildly on its hook, shadows leaping across the walls as the two men clashed. Emily pressed into the corner, her hands shaking, every instinct screaming for her to hide. But she couldn't look away. She had spent too many years trapped in silence, too many years powerless, and now the fight for her life was unfolding before her eyes. Frank came back with another swing, fueled by drunken rage and greed. Jack blocked, his years of experience showing in the way he kept his footing, each punch landing with purpose. Still, Frank's size and fury made him dangerous. The struggle shook the small house, the sound of fists and boots echoing in the wooden room. At last, Jack forced Frank down, pinning him hard against the floor. The pistol clattered out of Frank's grip, skidding across the boards. Jack's voice came low, sharp, every word like a hammer. "Your time's up. You're finished here." Emily stepped forward, her knees trembling but her eyes burning with a strength she never knew she had. Looking down at the man who had broken her, she spoke with a voice steadier than she felt. "You will answer for what you've done. Not to me, not to him, but to the law." For the first time, Frank's expression flickered with fear. His bravado cracked, because deep down he knew she was right. In the West, a man could run from enemies, could bury the truth in silence. But no man could run forever from justice. And justice was coming. The room was heavy with the sound of breathing. Frank's ragged gasps scraped the floorboards while Jack's voice lingered in the air like a blade still raised. Emily stood only a few feet away, her bare feet trembling against the wooden planks, her blanket slipping from her shoulders. The fire behind her threw long shadows across the walls, flickering over the wreckage of the fight, the overturned table, the dented lantern, and Frank pinned beneath Jack's arm. For so long, Emily had dreamed of someone stopping him, of the blows landing somewhere other than her own body, of the voice of defiance not being hers alone. But standing there, watching Jack's strength hold Frank down, she didn't feel triumph. She felt small, unsteady, as if any second the world might flip back into the nightmare she had been living for years. Her lips parted, and before she could stop herself, words fell out in a shaky whisper. "Don't let him hurt me again." Jack's eyes flicked toward her, steady and sure. "He won't. Not while I'm here." Emily's chest tightened. She wanted to believe it, wanted so badly to believe those words, but trust had been beaten out of her too many times. The tears she had held back spilled down her face, silent but unrelenting. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, trying to muffle the sobs, ashamed of her weakness even now. Jack shifted, his knee pressing harder into Frank's back, forcing another grunt of pain from the man beneath him. "You're done, Frank," he muttered. "You've taken enough." Frank spat on the floor, his voice slurred with rage. "That ranch is mine. Everything here is mine. She ain't nothing but a scared little girl. She'll come crawling back. You'll see." Emily flinched as if the words themselves had struck her. Her body curled inward, arms hugging herself as though to shield against an invisible blow. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't find her voice. But then Jack's words came, firm and unshaken. "You're wrong. She's stronger than you'll ever be." The sentence cracked through the room like thunder. Emily's knees buckled, and she sank into the chair by the fire, her blanket pooling around her legs. Her hands still shook, but for the first time in years, she felt a hand reaching through the darkness, pulling her towards something she had almost forgotten, dignity. Jack shoved Frank hard against the floor one last time, then pushed himself up. He didn't take his eyes off the man as he kicked the pistol further out of reach. He turned to Emily. "You all right to stay here while I tie him?" She nodded quickly, though her voice refused to come. Jack dragged Frank toward the corner of the room, wrestled rope around his wrists with the same steady determination he had shown all night. Frank cursed and struggled, but Jack's grip was iron. When it was done, he leaned back, breathing heavy but calm, and fixed his gaze on Emily again. "You're safe now," he said, "but I won't lie to you. This isn't over. Men like him don't quit easy." Emily swallowed hard, her throat aching. Her voice finally broke free, small but clear. "Then what happens to me?" Jack crouched, so they were eye to eye, his expression softer now. What happens is you don't face this alone anymore. The words unraveled something inside her. For years, she had carried her fear alone, locked away in silence. Hearing them was like air filling lungs that had been empty for too long. She buried her face in her hands and let the sobs come, heavy and raw, spilling out in a way they never had before. Not muffled, not hidden real. Jack stayed crouched, letting her cry, his hand hovering close but not touching, as if waiting for her to decide if she wanted comfort. When at last she lowered her hands, her face red and wet with tears, she looked at him and whispered, "Why do you care? You don't even know me." His jaw flexed, eyes dark with memory. "Because I've seen too many good folks left broken by men like him. I can't fix all of it, but I can damn well try to make sure he doesn't break you any more than he already has." Her breath caught. It wasn't a promise of miracles, but it was the first honest vow she had ever heard from a man. The night dragged on. Frank sat tied, muttering curses until exhaustion finally dulled his voice to silence. Emily stayed curled in the chair, every so often jolting awake at the faintest sound outside. Jack never rested. He sat by the door with his pistol within reach, his eyes fixed on the dark beyond the window. His stillness was a kind of shield, steady and unmovable. When dawn finally broke, the first light spilled through the cracks in the wood, painting the floor in stripes of gold. Emily's eyes fluttered open. For the first time in months, she had slept without ropes cutting her skin. She blinked at the soft light, dazed, as if she wasn't sure if this morning was real. Jack rose from his chair, stretching his stiff shoulders. His voice was rough with fatigue, but steady as ever. "Sun's up. Sheriff will be here before long. We'll see this through." Emily sat up slowly, her blanket sliding down. Her wrists still ached, her body still bruised, but for the first time, there was no shadow hovering over her bed. She looked at Frank, slumped against the wall, tied and beaten but still breathing, and a strange strength flickered in her chest. She didn't smile, didn't rejoice, but she felt something else, something she had thought long lost. Hope. The days after Frank's arrest stretched long and uncertain. Emily wandered through the ranch house like a ghost, brushing her fingertips along the walls as if trying to remind herself the place was still hers. The bruises on her skin began to fade, but the ones inside lingered, sharp and raw. Sometimes she woke in the night, drenched in sweat, her chest heaving, convinced the sound of boots on gravel meant Frank had returned. She would jolt upright, her blanket clutched to her chin, eyes darting to the shadows, until she saw Jack, sitting by the dying fire, his hat tipped low but his pistol always near. His presence grounded her in ways she couldn't explain. She didn't trust sleep, but she trusted him. Jack worked the ranch like it belonged to him, though he never claimed it. At sunrise, he was already outside, mending broken boards, feeding the horses, checking the water troughs. Emily watched him from the porch, wrapped in the same old coat, unsure whether she should join him or hide inside. Part of her longed to help, to feel like the ranch was hers again, but fear kept her rooted. She had been told for so long that she was nothing, that she couldn't do it alone, that she had started to believe it. One afternoon, Jack returned from the barn, sweat glistening on his brow, dirt clinging to his shirt. He set a bucket down and looked straight at her. "Come on," he said. "You're not made for sitting on porches all day." Emily stiffened. "I don't know if I can." "You can," he said simply, as if that settled it. He walked her out to the corral, handed her a brush, and pointed to the old chestnut horse she'd once ridden as a little girl. Her hand shook as she reached for its mane, memories of Frank's angry shouts flashing through her mind. Too slow, too weak, useless girl. She froze, pulling her hand back. Jack's voice was calm but firm. "He's not here. You are. Start again." It took a long moment before she dared to touch the horse's coat, her palm tentative. The animal shifted slightly, then stilled under her hand. Warmth spread through her fingertips, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear. Pride. The work was slow. Her arms ached. Her body wasn't strong enough yet, but Jack never rushed her. When she faltered, he didn't scold. He showed her again. When she doubted, he spoke steady words. Keep your back straight. Don't grip too tight. Trust yourself. It was in those small lessons that Emily realized what Frank had stolen from her wasn't just land or safety. It was belief in herself. Every cruel word had planted doubt, until she had been convinced she couldn't survive without him. Jack was teaching her to tear those lies out, one by one. At night, by the fire, she began to talk more. Not much, just pieces. The way her mother used to sing while hanging laundry. How she'd once loved the smell of fresh hay in the barn. The places she used to hide when Frank's temper boiled over. Jack didn't interrupt. He just listened, nodding sometimes, his eyes steady on hers. One evening, when her voice cracked under the weight of memory, she whispered, "I hate that he still lives in my head. Even when he's gone, he's here." Jack leaned forward, his hands clasped. That's what men like him do. They crawl inside you and make you believe you'll never be free. But you will. Every time you speak it out loud, every time you stand back up, you take the ground back from him. Her throat tightened, but his words sank deep. She realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was slowly reclaiming pieces of herself. Weeks passed. Emily grew steadier on her feet, her hands rougher from work. She learned how to fix a fence post, how to carry water without spilling, how to ride the chestnut again with her back straight. She fell once, hard against the dirt, her body shaking with humiliation. But when Jack reached to help, she pushed his hand away and climbed back into the saddle herself. The small smile he gave her afterward stayed with her for days. Still, healing wasn't a straight road. Some nights, she curled on her bed with tears soaking the pillow, whispering to herself that she wasn't strong enough, that Frank had broken her beyond repair. But each morning she rose, and each morning she tried again. And Jack was always there, not to carry her, but to stand beside her. One night, as the firelight flickered across his face, she found herself asking softly, "Do you think I'll ever stop being afraid?" Jack stared into the flames, silent for a long while. Then he said, "Fear never goes. It just learns its place. What matters is whether it rules you, or you rule it." Emily turned those words over in her mind long after he spoke them. She wasn't sure yet which side she stood on, but she knew she wanted to keep fighting for the answer. For the first time in years, the ranch began to feel like hers again. Not because it was easy, but because she was learning to stand on it with her own 2 feet. And those scars still traced her spirit. She began to carry them not as shame, but as proof she had survived. The morning air carried a sharp chill, though the sun already pushed gold across the horizon. Emily stood on the porch wrapped in Jack's old coat, her bare feet pressing into the rough boards. She stared at the dirt road leading to the ranch, heart pounding at every sound of wind through the grass. Jack had promised the sheriff would come, but part of her still believed Frank might slip free, that he would be standing behind her again with that cruel grin. Inside, Frank sat slumped against the wall, wrists bound tight, his eyes burning with hate. He didn't speak much anymore. A man like him didn't need words to poison the air. His silence carried its own weight, thick with threat. Every time Emily's gaze drifted his way, her stomach twisted. She had lived too long under that shadow to believe it was gone just because a rope held his hands. Jack stepped outside, adjusting his hat against the morning light. He glanced at her, then at the road. His presence alone kept her steady. He wasn't a man of many words, but everything about him, his stance, his silence, the way he always put himself between her and Frank, spoke louder than anything Frank had ever said. "Sheriff's late," Emily whispered, her voice rough from the night before. "He'll come," Jack replied. His tone left no room for doubt. And sure enough, the faint thunder of hooves carried across the land. Emily's breath hitched as 3 riders appeared on the horizon, dust rising beneath their horses. The sheriff rode at the front, a broad man with a mustache that framed a face weathered by years of chasing trouble. 2 deputies followed behind. When they reached the ranch, the sheriff swung down from his horse, boots crunching on gravel. His eyes took in the sight. Emily pale and bruised, Jack steady and watchful, Frank tied like an animal inside the house. Jack spoke first, caught him red-handed. He's been beating on the girl, trying to force her off her land. Emily froze as the sheriff's eyes fell on her. She felt exposed, fragile under the weight of his stare, but then he nodded slowly, his expression softening. "You did the right thing, son," he said to Jack. Then to Emily, his voice gentler. "You're safe now. We'll take him in." The deputies hauled Frank to his feet, shoving him toward the door. He struggled, snarling, but the ropes and their grip held strong. As they dragged him past her, Frank's eyes locked on Emily's. "You think this is over? Girl, you're nothing without me. You'll beg me back before long." Emily flinched, but before the words could sink their claws too deep, Jack stepped forward, his frame a shield. "Not another word," he snapped, his voice so sharp it silenced even Frank. The sheriff's men dragged him away, throwing him onto a horse like a sack of grain. The moment he was gone, the air seemed lighter, though Emily still trembled as though the shadow lingered. She wrapped Jack's coat tighter around herself, her eyes fixed on the cloud of dust disappearing down the road. For the first time in years, she realized she could breathe without the weight of footsteps behind her. And yet the relief was tangled with fear. What would come next? What would life look like without the man who had stolen so much of it? Back inside, Jack poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She sipped slowly, her hands still shaking. "What if he gets out?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack's gaze held hers, steady and unyielding. "Then he'll find me waiting. You won't face him alone again." Something in his tone loosened the knot in her chest. She set the cup down, staring into the fire. The silence stretched, but it wasn't heavy like before. It was the kind of silence that gave room to breathe. Over the next few days, Jack stayed. He mended the broken fence, fed the horses, and repaired the front door Frank had nearly shattered. Emily moved quietly around him, still skittish like a deer that had been chased too long. But little by little, the tightness in her body began to ease. One evening, she found herself watching him as he worked by the corral, the sun setting behind him. His movements were steady, deliberate, a man who knew both hardship and patience. She didn't understand why he hadn't left, why he cared about her ranch when it wasn't his, but part of her was grateful he hadn't asked for thanks. Gratitude was hard to give when she was still learning how to trust. That night by the fire, she finally found her voice. "Why are you still here?" she asked. Jack set aside the tool he'd been sharpening, looked at her with tired but kind eyes. "Because fixing fences won't mean a thing if you're still broken inside. And you're not. Not if you've got someone to stand with you." Her throat tightened. She wanted to say she wasn't worth the trouble, that she'd only bring him pain, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she whispered, "I don't know how to be strong anymore." "You don't have to know," he said quietly. "You just have to keep standing up. Strength comes with time." For the first time in years, Emily believed it might be true. She curled in her blanket, eyes heavy, and let herself fall asleep, knowing someone was there who wouldn't let the darkness swallow her whole. The summer sun burned hot over the ranch. Days stretched long, filled with the work of fixing fences, mending roofs, and keeping the cattle watered. Emily moved through those days with tired arms and aching feet, but also with something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. Each nail she hammered, each bucket she carried, was proof that she was no longer helpless. Jack stayed close, never pushing her, but always ready if she needed him. He didn't hover, didn't treat her like glass, but somehow he always knew when to step in. When she grew frustrated trying to chop wood, he showed her how to hold the axe, steady and sure. When she lost her balance on a ladder, his hand caught her wrist before she could fall. And when the memories of Frank came crashing back in the dark of night, Jack sat by the fire until her shaking eased. Emily didn't understand why he cared so much. Most men she knew took what they wanted and left behind wreckage. Jack was different. He worked beside her, ate simple meals in silence, and asked for nothing in return. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't read, part sorrow, part pride, and something else she didn't yet have the courage to name. One evening, as the sky turned red and gold, Emily sat on the porch steps, her knees pulled to her chest. The cool breeze brushed her hair across her face. Jack walked up from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He paused when he saw her. "You look tired," he said gently. "I am," she admitted. but it's the good kind. The kind that comes after you've actually done something. She gave a faint laugh, almost surprised at herself. Jack leaned against the porch railing, his voice quiet. You've done more than something. You've kept this place alive. Emily shook her head, staring down at her bare feet. No, you kept it alive. If you hadn't come, her throat tightened. She couldn't finish the thought. Jack knelt down so he could meet her eyes. Emily, listen to me. You saved yourself the moment you called out. I just happened to be the one who heard. Her chest ached at his words. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down she knew there was truth in them. She had screamed that day because a piece of her still believed someone might come. And Jack had. The days turned into weeks, and something new began to grow in the quiet spaces between them. Not a grand romance, not the kind found in fairy tales, but something steady, unspoken. Emily found herself waiting for his footsteps outside, listening for his voice, watching for the way he moved with calm certainty. Jack, in turn, seemed content just to be near her, to see her stand taller each day. One night, after supper, they sat by the fire. Emily wrapped herself in a blanket while Jack leaned back in his chair. Silence filled the room, warm and comfortable. At last, she spoke. Do you ever think about leaving? She asked softly. Jack's gaze stayed on the flames. Sometimes. A man who's been on the trail as long as I have always wonders where he'll head next. Her heart sank a little, though she tried not to show it. And will you? He turned his eyes to hers. Not until I know you don't need me anymore. Her breath caught. The words were simple, but they carried weight. She didn't know how to reply, so she only nodded and looked back at the fire. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized she wasn't just grateful for Jack. She cared for him in a way that frightened her. The feeling was fragile, like something that might break if she looked at it too closely. She didn't dare name it, not yet. But it was there, growing quietly inside her chest. The ranch slowly began to look alive again. Grass pushed green through the dry earth. The fences stood straighter, and laughter, soft, hesitant, sometimes escaped Emily's lips. It startled her at first to hear herself laugh after so many years. Jack never mentioned it, but she caught the ghost of a smile on his face whenever it happened. Still, shadows remained. At night, when the wind rattled the windows, Emily sometimes woke in fear, convinced Frank had broken free and was outside. Jack would calm her with a hand on her shoulder, his voice low. You're safe. He's not here. Little by little, the words began to sink in. She was safe. And for the first time in her life, she began to wonder if she could also be loved. The seasons turned. Summer's dry heat gave way to autumn winds, and the ranch shifted with it. Emily had grown stronger by then. Her hands, once soft and shaking, were rough with calluses. Her back, once bent with fear, stood straighter. She had learned to saddle her horse alone, to mend fences without asking for help, and to ride across her land with a steady grip on the reins. But more than that, she had learned to carry herself differently. When she looked in the mirror now, she didn't only see scars. She saw proof. Proof that she had endured, that she had survived every blow Frank had thrown at her, and still stood. Jack never left. He didn't speak much about why he stayed, but Emily knew it wasn't out of pity. He was there because he wanted to be. Over time, their bond deepened. Not rushed, not forced, but steady, like roots digging into the earth. Gratitude turned to trust. Trust turned to something stronger, though neither of them named it. It didn't need naming. It lived in the small things. The way Jack placed her safety above his own. The way Emily saved him the last piece of bread without thinking. The way their silences felt full rather than empty. Frank never returned. The law kept him locked away, his threats silenced at last. But his shadow lingered in Emily's memory, and she sometimes wondered if she would ever truly be free of him. One evening, sitting by the fire, she asked Jack quietly, "Will he always live in my head?" Jack leaned forward, his voice calm. "Maybe, but every day you rise, every day you choose to live, you take another piece of yourself back. He can't touch that." Emily thought about those words long after he spoke them. She realized then that freedom wasn't about forgetting. It was about refusing to let fear own her future. Months later, The ranch thrived again. Neighbors who once kept their distance began to return, offering help and sharing stories. Word had spread of what she had endured and how she had fought back with Jack's help. Some looked at her with pity, but most with respect. She was no longer just the girl Frank had beaten. She was the young woman who had survived him. One morning, Emily rode out alone across the fields. The air was crisp, the sky wide and endless above her. She stopped her horse at the top of the hill and looked down at the ranch, the house, the barn, the fences she had helped repair. For the first time in years, she felt it again. Home! Her chest swelled, her eyes stung, but this time the tears came from something other than pain. They came from the simple truth that she had made it through. That evening, as she sat beside Jack by the fire, she finally spoke the words she had been holding. "I was broken," she said softly, "but you showed me I wasn't finished. You helped me find the pieces again." Jack's gaze stayed steady on hers. "You did that yourself. I was just there to remind you." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held both sorrow and joy. "Maybe, but I think we all need someone to remind us." The room grew quiet, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the night was calm. Emily leaned back, her heart lighter than it had been since she was a child. In that silence, she understood the lesson she would carry forever. That strength wasn't about never falling. It was about standing back up, even when the world tried to crush you. That justice might take time, but it comes if you keep standing tall. And that love, real love, wasn't about rescue or fairy tales. It was about choosing each other day after day, even in the dust and the dark. Emily had faced her worst fear and lived. And from that survival grew something greater than fear, hope. And hope, she realized, was stronger than anything Frank had ever taken from her. Sparkle's moral lesson. We all face our own Franks in life, shadows of cruelty, betrayal, or despair. But no matter how deep the scars, healing is possible. With courage, with patience, and sometimes with the help of someone who refuses to let us fall, we can rise again.